Good afternoon and good morning, everybody. My name is Lynn Tremonti. I'm with America's Voice and America's Voice Education Fund. We're here at this Google Hangout on Air to talk about some major developments in the immigration front, some positive and some very negative. But we've got experts on the line with you to share information about what's happening, answer questions. Let's go right to them. So I'd like everybody to just introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll get into the conversation. We'll start with David.
Hi, I'm David Leopold. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I'm an attorney, an immigration attorney. I was the president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Jorge Mario?
Good morning, everyone. Jorge Mario Cabrera. I'm Director of Communications for CHIRLA, which is the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles.
Thank you. Juan?
Hi, my name is Juan Escalante, and I'm the Director of Digital Campaigns for America's Voice. I'm based out of Tallahassee, Florida.
Thank you. And last but not least, Karen.
Hi, I am Karen Tillman. I'm the Legal Director with the National Immigration Law Center based in Los Angeles.
Thank you so much. We're going to start right off with a frightening development that happened very late last year. We found out that the Obama administration had decided to revive a tactic of home raids targeting people that have no criminal record whatsoever. And they were actually going after refugees fleeing Central American gang violence and other abuses. So, you know, this was the fact of these raids, I think, sent a shockwave through the immigrant community that has PTSD from the Bush era raids that just ravaged families. And you know, we need to get the facts out, and that's one of the most important things, and then let people know how they can be informed of their rights. So one of the first questions that we have is whether David and others can explain who is actually supposedly being targeted in the raids, and sort of what the timeline has been and what we know about them so far.
Well, the administration, Lynn, has said, the Department of Homeland Security, through the Secretary, Jay Johnson, has said that the targets, the people they're going after, are Central Americans who came in after January 1, 2014, so mainly in May 2014, and have been through the process. That is, they were ordered deported by an immigration judge and either failed to show up for removal or somehow didn't cooperate. So they've arrested 121 people and processed them for removal. It's important to remember, though, that you know, our experience with ICE is that, you know, you give them an inch and they take a mile. So we're getting troubling reports across the country that ICE agents are going beyond Central Americans, are going beyond people who entered after January of 2014. And it's important that people are vigilant. It's important that everybody understand that they have rights, that even if they're undocumented, they have rights. Mainly, they don't have to let anybody into their house. You can refuse to talk. If ICE comes to your house, do not open the door. Ask to see a warrant. If they don't have a warrant, you don't open the door. A warrant is a piece of paper signed by a judge, which tells the ICE agent that they can come in the house. If you open the door, they're going to say you gave permission to come into the house. So be careful about opening the door. Do not talk to them. You do not have to talk to law enforcement, whether it's ICE or anybody else. And do not do it unless you have first asked for an attorney's advice and be with an attorney. So there's a variety of other, I'm going to let other people talk, but important that people remember, number one, not to panic. You have rights, and make sure you know what those rights are. There's all kinds of great information. The National Immigration Law Center has a great website. So does the National Immigration Project of the Lawyers Guild, with a lot of information for immigrants in all kinds of languages, including Spanish, of course.
Jorge Mario, tell us what you've seen, not only in these raids, but also what the community's been speaking about in reaction.
Whether it's 121 or 10,000, the result, unfortunately, has been the same, which is to create panic in the community, and that's what we have seen. We spoke to a number of people yesterday about their experiences in how they're getting ready and how they're preparing a family plan, which is what we urge people to do, to have a conversation with the family about what would happen if, and to, for example, memorize 2 phone numbers that they would keep in mind should they be detained by immigration officials, to make sure that they call an organization that they trust or an attorney once they are inside a detention center, for example. But unfortunately, the effect of these so-called raids has been, in fact, immediate, and it's been quite damaging to people's sense of protection in the United States. And unfortunately, that's probably what this administration wanted to do. And it comes at the heels, we should mention, of a very racist and anti-immigrant political campaign that some presidential candidates are staging. And that's very unfortunate, because the result, of course, is instability for all communities, not just the immigrant community. And we have seen, in fact, as Leopold mentioned, non-Central Americans being detained. And these detentions are happening at early hours of the morning. It's one by one that they're picking up individuals. They're not doing these major raids as they used to happen with the Bush administration, or as they happened the first weekend of January. But ICE is, in fact, taking people away every single day, except that they're not making a big deal out of it, and so communities need to be prepared.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just add there,
Yeah.
sorry, Lynn. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I want you to add, please. Drew.
Yeah, you know, the backdrop against all of this is that in November of 2014, the president said that he was going to prioritize the removal of criminals, the removal of national security threats, like that. If you've been in the country since well before January 1, 2014, if you've been here a long time, if you're undocumented, you really shouldn't be a priority for removal. You're not a priority for removal. And what Jorge was saying is extremely important. It's important. There's strength in the community and there's strength in numbers. So make sure you have with you at all times a telephone number of also an attorney, but also somebody in the community. Because if you're arrested and you're not supposed to be considered a priority, we need to know about it. Because the administration, the Obama administration, is claiming that this is not happening, that they're not going after people, other than those few who they claim got due process, went through their trials and lost. So it's extremely important that we know what's going on, because if we don't know, if the community doesn't know what's going on, we can't assert rights on a national level. And it's extremely important.
You know, I know the administration has announced some new efforts to process people fleeing violence in Central America as refugees before they come here, recognizing that these countries in the Northern Triangle are some of the most dangerous in the world. The stories are harrowing, and so isn't it contradictory that the administration is saying on the one hand that yes, there's a refugee, a situation creating refugees, but we're going to deport the same people who fled that violence back to these dangerous conditions? I mean, how do you guys and anybody, Karen, Jorge Mario, Juan, and David, anybody who's got a thought on this, how does that make sense, and what can we do about it?
Well, it doesn't make sense, Lynn. It's absolutely absurd. So don't even try to make sense of it. The asylum law and the refugee law is very complicated and very technical. And just because somebody has been denied asylum technically by a judge doesn't mean they're not in danger, of course. We know that. And under the present circumstances, should not be deported. I don't care when they came in to the United States. So the policy itself of saying, well, we're going to process refugees down in the Northern Triangle, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, because the situation is dangerous there, makes no sense when you're deporting people right down there. So we just have to be vigilant in terms of protecting people's rights in the United States, people who are already here, and make sure that they're not deported to violence.
Right. I guess the only thing I would add is, I mean, obviously agree with David. It doesn't make any sense. It's important, you know, good. It's something that we should have been doing earlier and on a larger scale, recognizing what is happening in these 3 specific countries. But it really is on us, I think, to, you know, work together and really lift up that it's not acceptable for the administration to say, on one hand, I will recognize as refugees, given the violence in these 3 countries, folks who are in the country, but I will disrupt and tear apart families and moms and kids who are here. And that's not something that we can tolerate.
Yep. Let me ask one more question on the reads, and then we'll move on to Supreme Courts. And this is for Jorge Mario to start, and maybe others can add in. If there's an individual out there watching this webinar who wants to know what they themselves can do to help their community get more informed about their rights, what are some resources or recommendations you would offer to them?
I first must say that it's an asinine, cruel, and intolerable design that this administration has put together to persecute people leaving such horrendous situations in El Salvador. I'm from El Salvador, and I know what people every day tell me is going on in that country, and in Honduras, and Guatemala, and Nicaragua. And so for this administration to speak about human rights and the respect of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is hypocritical, to say the least. On the other hand, to answer your question, folks should be watching. There's many different resources, but one that is easily available is a video 9 minutes long called Conozca sus derechos, Know Your Rights, in English and Spanish, very good quality, and it goes through different scenarios that folks have gone through when meeting either a police officer who asks about your documented status, or a raid at a work site, or ICE officers coming to your home. It's available on YouTube. Chirla Videos is the name of our channel, and it's also available on our website. What you can do is show that video to a group of friends coming together for a dinner or for a little charla, a little plática, and then to speak about what this video means to you and how you can set up an emergency plan, a community response that helps you keep protected. Unfortunately, the raids are going to continue, whether it's 1 by 1 or whether it's 100 at a time, until we get immigration reform. That's just the reality.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. We'll make sure that we link to the video, to what you just talked about, and your website and the YouTube channel, so that people can get that that phone call immediately. That sounds like a great resource. Thank you so much. And now we're going to try to transition into some good news, and it feels very incongruent to have both, you know, the administration be opposing immigrants on the one hand and then fighting for immigrants on the other hand. But what I'm referring to, of course, is the lawsuit that Republicans have filed against DAPA and the expansion of DACA, and the administration has been, you know, fighting this lawsuit at every step, and now we're all the way to the Supreme Court. We just found out earlier this week that the Supreme Court will take up the case this year, which puts us on track to have a resolution on this issue by the end of June, and hopefully the ability for people to begin applying soon thereafter for their deferred action status. So let's talk about, you know, this, to set the scene for folks, Karen, you know, why it's a good thing that the Supreme Court has taken the case, and what some of the key dates are that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is jarring to transition to this subject, but just one note on the transition. I would say we now have what we've been asking for, right? The programs were announced. We had a very politicized decision out of Texas almost a year ago, blocking those programs. And ever since then, we've been hoping to get to where we just got on Tuesday, which is we know the Supreme Court is taking up this case. And I would suggest that that is something powerful for us to use even as we face the raids, whether they're group raids or one-by-one individual. I think it's really wise that Jorge Mario pointed that out, because there's no excuse. While we now wait for the Supreme Court to give the final word on these programs, there's no excuse for deporting families. And I think that that's a tool that we should begin to use on this. But here's what we can look for. So in terms of key dates and painting the scene, I would suggest that the scene that we are looking forward to is the scene that we saw at the end of June last year in the marriage equality cases. That's what we're looking towards. Ultimately, at the end of June, around about June 25th or so, we ought to be able to get a decision and have both a legal victory and a moral victory at the Supreme Court. And we got to work towards that. What will happen next is a brief by the United States will be due in early March, and amicus briefs to follow. That'll be a key date, and then we're going to look towards, we don't have the date yet, but end of April or beginning of May will be the oral argument date at the Supreme Court.
Thank you. There's a couple legal issues I thought maybe we could explain for folks who've been reading news clips and kind of want to really get into the case a little bit. There is the Supreme Court, one of the issues they'll be looking at is called standing. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if Karen or David or both of you could explain what that means, and in this context specifically, so that would be great if you could explain. And again, the technical term is called standing.
I can give my one line on it, and then maybe David should chime in. So first I would say, don't be afraid of standing just because we're lawyers use fancy words. Here's what it really means. Does Texas and the other 25 states have a right whatsoever to even be in federal court? Did they have a right to even bring the lawsuit in the first place? Not are they right or wrong, but can they even be there? And that's really important, which is to say, one of the ways that the Supreme Court could rule is to toss this whole thing out altogether and say, you don't even have a right to be in court. So that's what standing means.
Yeah, and I think that one of the judges that really picked up well on that whole issue, actually there were two judges in the Fifth Circuit, both judges that disagreed early on with one of the preliminary motions and then in the big decision that came down in November. And really what they saw is that this is a political case by the Republicans that shouldn't be in court. Politics belongs at the ballot box. It doesn't belong in a courtroom. And that's sort of a more generalized way of putting it, but I agree wholeheartedly with what Karen said. It's about whether the case should even be brought, whether Texas has the right to bring it. And I think we're in pretty good shape on that question. And we're hoping that I think that we come into court with a very strong position on the question of whether or not this case should even be there. And the answer is no.
So what happens there are two scenarios. The first scenario is that the court says that there is no standing, and then what happens if the court says there is standing? Is it over with, or are there additional steps? What happens, Karen?
So if the court says there's no standing, we get our big moment in front of the Supreme Court. It's over. It's done. The case is closed. You don't get to, there's no further anything when the Supreme Court says you don't have a right to sue. That'll be the end of that. And the program should open up. That's what will happen. If the Supreme Court says, okay, you have a right to sue, we can still win in multiple ways. Then they simply have to go on to consider what are now 3 legal questions before the court, all of which should come out in full support of the program. These are the 3 legal questions in brief. Number 1, did the president have to go through something called formal rulemaking or notice and comment to create the DAPA and expanded DACA programs? It's a process where you post it in the Federal Register and give the public time to comment. That's question number 1. Did you not? Now, mental just parentheses for yourselves that DACA didn't have to go through that, and that kind of states the obvious in my opinion, which is there is no need for a formal rulemaking procedure here. Second question before the court is it in line with federal immigration law for the president to exercise this kind of authority? Again, answer I think is absolutely yes. The Supreme Court has told us as recently as 2012 in the U.S. versus Arizona case that the federal government has total, decision-making authority over whether to remove people from the country or to not remove people from the country. Third and last question, this is the new one, this is the curveball that was thrown by the Supreme Court on Tuesday, is they do want to have some briefing on the one constitutional question in the case. That's called the Take Care Clause. And here's what it means, though. It basically boils down to the other question. So the Constitution says that the president must take care that the laws are faithfully executed. And so the same question, the essential question is the same. Is DAPA and DACA in line with federal immigration law? Because it is, the answer to that question should also be in our favor.
Yeah. One thing, Lynn, that I wanted to point out, that what the case is not about, because I've seen some confusion in the newspapers and on some listservs and so forth. They sued to block DAPA and DACA expansion. They did not sue to block 2012 DACA, the original DACA. So no matter what happens in this case, this does not affect at this point DACA 2012. And I want people to be sure that they should be continuing to register for DACA 2012. They should be continuing to re-register, renew. And the decision of the court is really not about DACA 2012. It's about DAPA and DACA expansion.
I think Lynn might be muted. But while she goes off mute, I think I'll just add to some of the stuff that David and some of the things that have been discussed throughout the broadcast is essentially, what can people look forward to next? Because we keep reading news about what Republican candidates or other people are saying about these programs, and we want to make sure that folks not only remain informed, but also go, with a clear head as to what this means in the long term come November in the general election. Right now we're undergoing a political climate where Republican candidates running for seeking the nomination of their party for president have all pledged to undo these programs. You're talking about relief that has been, that shields me, my brothers, and millions of other, that could potentially lead to the shielding of millions of other undocumented immigrants across this country. And we want to make sure that folks are aware is that, we're waiting for the Supreme Court decision, but we're also looking ahead into the election and what that can mean for these programs as well. So if you're watching this and you need a reason to vote and you have friends who are covered under these programs, this is essentially what we're talking about. Now it's more important than ever to make sure that you get informed, know the issues, and know that who are the candidates that are going to stand behind immigrant families like mine and all of those across the United States as well. So I'll
Thanks, Juan. Yeah, I want to add to that because I think it's, there's a tendency for people to think about this as a lawsuit by unnamed Republicans against the president. And I don't think we see it that way. We see it as a lawsuit deliberately engaged in by specific Republican governors and attorneys general, including mine in Ohio and Juan's in Florida, and to sue their own families, to sue families that are their constituents in their states, to sue the children who are American citizens. So I think that's important, and I don't know if Jorge Mari wants to add on that, the accountability piece, that this is not a faceless lawsuit going after the president. This is actually a deliberate strategy by specific people going after families that we're fighting for.
That's correct. Just as we mentioned, the impact that a policy decision on raids impacts families, children, citizens, and so forth, and whole communities. Likewise, a decision by the court and to sue the president for trying to implement a humane program such as DAPA and DACA extended is also impacting entire communities. And of course, 4.7 million families and counting, it's not just a small number, it's a huge number that it's going to create lots and lots of positive contributions to this nation and to the respective states where these families live. That's why we are saying to folks, this is a wonderful piece of news. It's a little bit of hope. Let's wait for the decision. But in the meantime, let's start getting ready, because should DAPA be implemented, let's hope that USCIS will also be ready to say, we are going to be implementing this as soon as possible. Let's apply.
That's right, Jorge Mario, and thank you. We're going to wrap up now, but just to point people to a few more resources, again, we'll put the CHIRLA information out to know your rights on the blog post that accompanies this Google Hangout. If you have specific questions about the lawsuit and DAPA and DACA and your potential eligibility, you can go to dapaquestions.org, dapaquestions.org, and you can submit your specific question and get it answered by a very qualified immigration lawyer. And then, of course, there's so many groups around the country who are doing workshops and have been helping people get their documents together to be prepared to be able to file quickly once the programs are unfrozen. So I encourage you to seek out the local immigrant rights networks and organizations in your area. And we're happy to help link you up to people if you're not sure how to get there, because they can help you get ready so that we can implement this program well and strongly as soon as it's unstuck. So thanks, everybody. Hope you have a wonderful day and stay in touch.
Have a good day.